What is up, gamers? It is Styx here, and today I'm going to be going over Jaren Ward, or at least my speculations on him based on the footage from the test build where Jaren Ward was allowed to be played with all of his abilities, as well as the new Last Word exotic hand cannon, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and the new artifacts. Credits to Thatunknowndr for much of the footage here, as I was not part of the playtest myself. I'll be giving you a rundown of each of his abilities with my thoughts on their usefulness and what kind of content they apply to, as well as my theories for different sets of artifacts that I think would work best for his kit, and how these new artifacts affect those builds. If you like this speculative first impressions and build guide, make sure you subscribe. It's the best metric to let me know that you like what you're seeing. Getting immediately into his passive, we have Stag Protection. Dealing precision damage with weapons grants 1 stack of Stag Totem. Up to 1 stack can be gained every 0.2 seconds via this method, and defeating combatants or dealing damage with Blazing Shot or High Noon Duel also grants a Stag Totem stack. Defeating elites or stronger combatants or hitting the same target with at least 50% of the pellets in a single shotgun shot grants an additional Stag Totem stack. Up to 48 Stag Totem stacks can be held at a time, and Jaren starts combat with 48 stacks. Once Stag Totem reaches 48 stacks, it restores 1 charge of Emergency Evasion, which is his S2 ability, and if Jaren casts either of his signature abilities at this time, he consumes all Stag Totem stacks to enter the Stag Protection state for 12 seconds. The Stag Protection state grants Jaren control immunity for 6 seconds and enhances his signature abilities. The light infused rounds of Blazing Shot will also deal 30% more damage, and their damage no longer decreases if they consecutively hit the same combatant. Emergency Evasion's Shock Grenade deals an extra 30% damage, and its damage resistance effect is increased by an additional 20%. For reference, Control Immunity removes and grants immunity to all of the crowd control debuffs, such as Blind, Corruption, Suppression, Silence, etc., making this something that is extremely potent and will definitely be built around in the kinds of artifacts that I'm looking for, given that this gives him a base amount of damage reduction, as well as a significant damage increase to many of his abilities. All in all, this passive is very powerful and is going to let him use his abilities fairly quickly by restoring the charges of Emergency Evasion, combined with consistently getting Stag Protection to increase his damage and his damage resistance. For his S1, we have Blazing Shot. Jaren draws vows and marks the weak spots of up to 6 combatants within the reticle. Releasing the ability, Button fires 6 light-infused bullets at the marked combatants' weak spots in the order they were marked, dealing a significant amount of solar damage per shot, and if light-infused bullets hit the same target consecutively, the damage dealt is gradually decreased to a minimum of 50%. This is the effect that Stag Protection removes, meaning that while you have Stag Protection active, this bit about it decreasing the damage no longer applies. The number of marks and the order combatants were marked in determines the number of light-infused bullets each combatant will be hit with upon firing, and if a round cannot deal damage, it will refund 16% energy. Only combatants within a 30-meter radius can be marked, and once they are more than 30 meters away or leave the screen's range, they lose their mark. So you have a limited amount of time before you can act on your mark here. Light-infused bullets also have a max range of 30, and if no combatants could be marked by the time Jaren stops aiming, the ability energy consumed will be refunded. So not too much worry about whiffing it as long as there's nothing in the area. This looks a lot like Cassidy's ultimate in Overwatch, if you've ever been familiar with that, but it works a little bit differently in that you can directly see the range as time goes on, and there is no such thing as it getting closer and then dealing more damage. It just stacks up the number of shots and marks each of them individually. Like it says, you want to make sure all of the targets are within your screen, otherwise they won't be able to do very much. The fact that it also refunds energy based on bullets you don't use means that this ability can be used very, very frequently, which gives me some ideas for the 4th slot, as one of my favorite artifacts really heavily builds into this, at least if we assume the new artifact doesn't take its spot. Jaren's signature 2 is Emergency Evasion. Jaren jumps up to 12 meters in the direction he's moving and gains invisibility for a short period of time. Jumping reloads both weapons with 100% of their magazine capacity, while also granting Jaren 40% acceleration and 20% damage resistance for 8 seconds. This is a significant time period for damage resistance and a significant speed boost that comes with a movement ability. This will make him extremely potent for anything that is related to needing to speedrun activities or needing to cover a lot of distance quickly. In addition to that, marksman dodge enjoyers in Destiny 2 will be familiar with the fact that this jump or dodge will reload his weapons with 100% of their magazine capacity. But not only does it do all of this, it also throws a shock grenade up to 16 meters away in the direction of your reticle, which deals a pretty significant amount of solar damage to combatants within 8 meters of it and blinds them for 3 seconds. This ability also on top of all of this, starts with 2 charges at talent 0, which makes this extremely nice because you compare it to something like Ning phase dodge or something like many other characters' movement abilities in this game, and they usually require you to invest significantly more in order to get this kind of movement and utility out of a single ability. And in addition, if you recall earlier with the stag totem stacks, once you reach 48, you restore 1 charge of your emergency evasion, meaning that not only is it only a 12-second cooldown with 2 charges, but this can also recharge faster than those 2 charges, making it extremely good with any artifact or any kind of requirement on perks that requires you to use an ability prior to dealing damage. You'll be able to do this very consistently and repeatedly throughout entire damage phases or potentially entire encounters. Another important point here is that with the emergency evasion damage resistance, you have a total of 40% from this. Keep in mind that continuously stacking it does have diminishing returns, but at the very least on its own, if you don't stack anything on top of it, this is extremely useful. Now, if you combine this with some other effects, you might hit those diminishing return ranges, but you will have a significant more damage resistance, and this gives you another stacking effect for damage resistance that might open up certain builds that may not otherwise be as useful. And now for his super. This is a longer super cooldown, it's a full 2 minutes, but it has the power to justify it. High Noon Duel. Jaren draws both his equipped hand cannon and vows, infusing them with light and entering his super state. While his super is active, each attack will alternate between firing his equipped hand cannon and vows. While firing, Jaren will automatically lock onto the weak spots of targets within the reticle and within a 30-meter radius, dealing a huge amount of solar damage and inflicting knockout. For reference, knockout acts as an interrupt or a stagger, which can be pretty useful in locking down certain opponents that have some more annoying abilities. In addition to this, super empowered shots deal full damage to targets within a 30-meter radius, and exceeding this range will cause the damage to gradually fall off until it reaches the minimum of 50% damage. Each round of shooting consumes a varying number of rounds, with a total of 18 rounds per supercast. If all rounds are used up, Jaren will exit his super state early, meaning there's no benefit to sitting in it for too long unless you're trying to line up some kind of extra shot, so you might as well use your emergency evasion with all of that damage resistance, invisibility, and the mobility to put yourself in a good position within 30 meters of all of the targets you want to hit with this super, so that you can use it as quickly as possible and then get back to jumping around doing all of the things you need to do, which combines fairly well with the last part of this super, that entering the super state fully restores emergency evasion charge. Now, if you were to take this as the worst possible interpretation with the way that it is written, then you're getting at least 1 extra charge each time you use High Noon Duel on your emergency evasion, so you lose nothing from making sure you open up and get ready to use it by using this evasion. And if you take it in the best scenario, then you would get both of your charges back from this 1 supercast, which is extremely useful to essentially have a button every 2 minutes that gives you both charges of your emergency evasion back, while also having stag protection giving you extra in the background. His super state lasts for up to 20 seconds, during which Jaren gains high damage resistance and increased movement speed, as if he needed more. I will note that Unknown mentions running into a problem where if you are too close to a target, then the lock-on feature doesn't work, so this might make it a little bit more difficult, especially if you're on mobile, but I'm hoping this will be fixed when Jaren comes to live servers. Jaren's weapon mastery is Welling Light. At level 1, while stag protection is active, Overflowing Light enhances weapons, granting Jaren's hand cannon and shotgun 4 stacks of Welling Light each. Welling Light causes firing weapons to deal an additional instance of solar damage equal to 40% of the weapon's damage. Welling Light stacks 8 times, and each shot fired consumes 1 stack. Additionally, weapons gain the ability to lock onto combatants' weak spots within a small range while Welling Light is active. The lock-on is ineffective against other light bearers. At levels 2 and 3, the damage ratio is increased, and then at level 4, when Jaren has Welling Light and consecutively hits the same target, he deals an additional 10% damage, which increases up to 30% by the 3rd hit. Then, at level 5, the damage ratio is increased to 120%. This is a pretty potent weapon mastery that is going to be active extremely frequently because of stag protection, and gives us even more reason to build into that and build around it as we go forward. Now for his relic traits. For the first, we have skill rewarded. Dealing precision damage with weapons grants 1 stack of skill rewarded. Up to 1 stack can be accumulated every 0.2 seconds. Whenever skill rewarded reaches 3 stacks, it will be converted into 2 stacks of stag totem. This fits extremely well with the stag protection passive period because the timing is the exact same of being 0.2 seconds, gaining a stack from each of these, which means that it basically just causes you to gain stag totem stacks significantly more quickly than you did before and make the feel of your rotation much more smooth and effective. The second relic trait is Light's Requite. Dealing damage with Jaren's abilities or Welling Light restores his total health equal to 60% of the base damage dealt. Overflow healing will not occur once Jaren's total health reaches 100%. I'm not fully sure if this is meant to specifically nerf Ring of Conversion, in which case probably a good idea, as this seems like an extremely powerful ability that could definitely be abused with that combination. If it doesn't, then that is definitely something I would recommend looking at. And finally, for the third relic trait, we have Clash of Fates. As you may know, the title of this might specifically be referring to his clash with Dredge and Yor as a bit of an homage, as this was most certainly a duel of fates. If High Noon Duel deals damage to the same target consecutively within 5 seconds, damage dealt will increase. Each consecutive hit increases damage by 10% up to a 50% increase. This is about as potent as you think it is for dealing with bosses, as you are going to be dealing a ton of damage by just consecutively firing at the same enemy until they fall over, which definitely can make certain decisions hard, as at this point I'm wondering whether his weapon damage or his ability damage will be higher. Now Jaren's lightweight companion ability is Precision Enhancement, so every 3 consecutive precision hits will trigger Precision Hunt, which increases the damage of ability and weapon precision hits by a significant amount for 6 seconds. I think this could be very useful for certain precision characters that we have, such as Umiko, such as Tantu, such as Hellhest, for any kind of damage build basically, and I think it combines extremely well with Wolf's solar ability boost, as well as Estella's stationary boost, which boosts solar damage while standing still, in order to boost something like your super damage while you are standing still and trying to get every target within your sights. If you don't have Estella, or if you're trying to be more mobile, I think Atal could have some serious usage here due to the buffs you will be giving yourself. Something else that could be pretty useful is the increased damage resistance from Yolder to just triple down on that high damage resistance that stag protection provides. For Jaren Ward's talents, we have some pretty interesting options. First is Dead Set. Blazing Shot's light infused bullets deal greater damage when fewer targets are marked, gaining up to a 30% additional damage bonus. This is particularly nice in the sense that it offsets the damage decrease, and if you have stag protection active, then this makes it so you deal significantly more damage to something like, for example, boss combatants or Shinkas or mini bosses that you'd prefer to take out extremely quickly. Whereas talent 2, you have Against the Odds, which after throwing Emergency Evasion's Shock Grenade, any damage Jaren deals for the next 3 seconds will restore his total health equal to 60% of the base damage dealt without the ability for overflow healing. I'm assuming once again that this doesn't stack with anything like Ring of Conversion, but this is a very nice effect on top of the healing he already gets from his relic traits. Next, we have Bitter Grudge, which increases High Noon Duel's damage by an additional 20%, pretty standard. Talent 4 is Light's Eruption. Welling Light's additional damage ratio is further increased by 30%, another standard one. His Talent 5, Offense as Defense, the duration of blind inflicted by emergency evasion is increased by an additional 1 second. This one's pretty meh for a Talent 5 as far as I'm concerned, but his Talent 6, as one would expect, is extremely potent. High Noon. When Jaren enters the stag protection state, Blazing Shot temporarily gains 1 additional charge, and it will be fully recharged. Additionally, while he's in the stag protection state, using enhanced Blazing Shot to inflict dual mark increases the target's damage taken from Jaren by 8% plus 2% times the number of stacks, and it stacks 6 times and lasts 8 seconds. This is a pretty potent damage bonus that seems to be able to go all the way up to 20% extra damage from anything that Jaren is doing. Very, very strong. Of course, as per usual, if you're someone who's spending a ton of money, it could be worth going for Talent 6 here, or if you've saved a ton / get extremely lucky, you could push for it. But otherwise, I would say he's pretty good at Talent 0, and his Talent 1 on its own is a pretty potent effect. So you could definitely make it by budgeting or doing some free-to-play shenanigans, while having the majority of his strength. He is definitely not a character that requires talents in order to be effective. Now, for the weapons, I'm sure many of you want to know what I think of the last word. For its intrinsic trait, we have Fan Fire. This weapon gains the paid in full buff for 5 seconds after hitting a target with a hip-fired shot, gradually increasing damage by up to 40% and reload speed by up to 40%. When aimed shots land precision hits, it gains the Settled in Turn buff for 5 seconds, which gradually increases precision damage by up to 60% and accuracy by 40%. Reloading removes these buffs. This seems to encourage mostly using your hip-fire while switching to aimed-in fire in order to take down targets quickly, or if you're trying to use the gun in something like PvP. Overall, a pretty powerful effect that combines very well with Jaren's kit. The exotic perk on Last Word is Raised Wager. When performing hipfire, if the health of base and elite targets is below 75%, or if the health of boss and powerful combatant targets is below 50%, hitting the torso deals damage equivalent to piercing damage. Very, very lovely. Now, for the catalyst, landing hipfire final blows or precision final blows while aiming down sights instantly grants the max number of buff stacks. Very nice for all-around usability. The Band 1 effect causes the top half of the magazine to deal 30% extra damage, which encourages you to further use the hipfire so that you can have that faster reload, because you're going to want to reload more frequently if you want to fully take advantage of this damage, while potentially combining it with evasion in order to get those free reloads from just moving around in the area. And finally, for Catalyst Band 2, this makes it so that the paid in full and settled in turn stacks are kept even after you reload. Extremely powerful, as you would expect, and is going to make this extremely easy to use and benefit from. For some other options, if you're not going to be able to get the Battle Pass, which I'm almost 100% sure the Last Word is going to be attached to, I recommend the Empty Fort strategy, which is the new solar hand cannon. You can rock this with Annihilation and Searing Mark to deal a huge amount of damage almost all of the time. Another decent perk is Misfortune's Confetti. For an exotic option, I'm going to recommend the Old Prefect, which causes successive hits to scorch the target and deal increased damage. I recommend this over Crimson because the healing from Crimson is not really necessary with Jaren's kit. For a shotgun option, I'm going to be recommending either Eternal Retribution with Line Formation and Karmic Reward, or Dual Loader and Karmic Reward. Wound counter is also a pretty decent option here, but not as good as Karmic Reward from what I can tell. Or the Thermopylae with Fraternity or Spinosaurus shots with Karmic Reward. This is to maximize the damage, and if you want to be going at it with all solar, then I would definitely recommend taking Thermopylae here over Eternal Retribution. If you're trying to take an exotic option here, from what I can tell, the Octant Riot Disperser is likely the stronger option, but I'm not super well versed on exotic shotguns, so pick your favorites. Now, let's go over some of the new artifacts as well as things that I like and things that I don't like about them. For your first slot, there's Calming Perturbation. Dealing precision damage grants a 38% damage resistance against sources within a 15-meter radius for 8 seconds. Something I dislike about this, especially on Jaren, is that it encourages you to attack targets within 30 meters of you, not 15 meters of you. And the damage resistance here is also large enough that you're starting to enter the territory of getting diminishing returns anyway. So I would say that there are other options that you could take in the slot that are likely going to be stronger, which I will be going over later when I go over my recommendations. In the second slot, you have Healing Perturbation. Dealing precision damage to targets within a 20-meter radius restores total health equal to 28% of the base damage dealt. This is another one that restricts you within a more specific range than his abilities would otherwise imply, but the actual effect here is pretty decent if you're wanting to really amp up that health. The only issue is, since you can't overflow your health with his abilities, it can only really do so much for you, and you might be better off either taking another set of damage resistance that makes the resistance more consistent, or trying to take some other form of protection in this slot. It's definitely pretty decent though, and I could definitely see builds making use out of it. In the third slot, we have Valiant Perturbation, simultaneously having damage resistance and movement speed applied by the wearer's own abilities grants 25% damage bonus. I'll tell you now, this is perfect. This is a wonderful slot 3 effect, and it's essentially made for Jaren Ward. It's constantly in effect, and you're going to be able to proc it and keep it going extremely easily. I will 100% be bringing this forward into my general build for him. Now finally, we have one that may or may not be a little bit disappointing, but it kind of depends on what you're doing here. Obstructive Perturbation. Attempting to inflict a combatant within a 20-meter radius with blind increases the wearer's damage by 25% for 8 seconds. Now, this is pretty nice just in the fact that your source of blind is going to be evasion, it's going to be able to proc pretty frequently, and a 25% damage increase for 8 seconds is pretty nice. The 20-meter radius restriction is a little bit unfortunate, but you're going to be playing pretty close range anyway when you're trying to pump out high damage, so I could see it taking effect reasonably often. Now let's compare this to Bellicose Planetesimal. Casting signature abilities grants a 30% weapon damage bonus for 6 seconds. The time is shorter here, the damage is increased, but it's only going to apply to your weapons. Of course, we already know that Jaren does incredible ability damage. The main kicker here though is that there's no range restriction and you gain the buff anytime you use a signature ability, not just from applying a blind. Overall, Bellicose Planetesimal will have more uptime, but will likely net you less damage while it's active due to the fact that Jaren's abilities seem to do such high damage. But I think there's another interesting option here, depending on how his abilities work. If the stack protection, the 20% that you get, stacks on top of, instead of being something that is fused with, his actual evasion damage resistance, then this is going to be 2 stacking damage resistance effects for Sympathetic Evolution, meaning that if we were to combine this with Unrelenting Evolution and Unrelenting Subgravity, for example, then we would have in total 4 damage resistance effects active every single time we used evasion, which would, with Sympathetic Evolution, grant us 7% damage for every damage resistance buff currently applied, which adds up to 28% damage increased just for using the dodge and jumping in the air. I think this could potentially be his strongest option if you were to decide to go all in on the damage resistance and allow Jaren's own built-in healing to do the work of keeping him alive in tandem with that. I look forward to seeing whether this stacks or not in the live game, but personally I think that's something I would be looking for. Meaning that if I were personally to be trying to build Jaren Ward's artifacts with what I know now and the information that I have seen, I would use Unrelenting Subgravity in the first slot to take less damage while airborne, combined with Unrelenting Evolution, so that anytime you gain a damage resistance effect other than Armored, it gives you an additional stacks of Armored, which gives us a second damage resist effect, or potentially a fourth if we are applying Evasion and Stagger Protection is applied as its own separate thing. In our third slot, I'd go with Valiant Perturbation. This is because the simultaneous damage resistance and movement speed bonus applied by your own abilities gives you a huge damage bonus in my opinion, and this would stack extremely well with these other effects we're using. And finally, Sympathetic Evolution to take advantage of that potential 28% damage increase. Keep in mind that even if you don't use stack protection here, it's still going to be a 21% damage increase just for using the dodge and jumping in the air, or a 14% increase while you land. Depending on how you play this character, it might cause the build you use to widely vary. All in all, I wouldn't sleep on the new 4th slot artifact either, it's just that this is an interesting build that I think would be really cool if it worked, and if you manage to pull it off, I could see Jaren Ward dealing some insane damage numbers, while also being extremely tanky. Now, for substats, I think the best ones you're going to want on him are most likely going to be Weapon Enhancement, Solar Boost, melee damage resistance. A little bit of healing bonus may be helpful for keeping him alive if you want just a little bit of extra, but also ability strength, signature boost, and super boost. The rest of the effects are going to be mostly based on your personal preference or things you might want to integrate into a specific build. All in all, this was my overview of Jaren Ward based on the information I've seen so far. Let me know what kinds of things you'd build him with, and if you disagree, feel free to tell me why. If you watched up to this point, then comment down below treats for Pumpkin. I'll give him one for each of you. Thank you guys for watching, and have a great day.